Evil stepmother sold her to a homeless man for $200, unaware he was a billionaire. The morning her stepmother sold her for $200, Willow Hartman was still wearing her mother's old apron, the one with the faded sunflowers, because it was the only thing she owned that still smelled like love. She stood at the edge of the driveway with a single duffel bag, watching her stepmother count crumpled bills into her palm like she was selling a piece of furniture nobody wanted anymore. "She's yours now," Corin Ashwell said to the stranger by the gate, not even glancing back at the girl she had raised for 11 years. "Feed her or don't. Makes no difference to me." And with that, the door closed and 18-year-old Willow Hartman's entire world folded into a single sentence. She had just been sold like livestock in broad daylight, on a quiet suburban street where no one thought to ask questions. If this story moves you already, take a moment to like this video, drop a comment, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Whispering Tales Stories, because what happens next will restore your faith in humanity. The man standing by the gate did not look like someone who had just made a purchase. He looked tired, dressed in a frayed canvas coat despite the warm autumn sun, his boots held together with duct tape, his beard unkempt, his eyes the only clean thing about him, sharp, steady and strangely kind. His name was Gideon Calloway, though Willow wouldn't learn that for days. To her, in that moment, he was simply the homeless man her stepmother had traded her to, likely for labor or worse, and she braced herself for the version of the world she had always feared might exist just beyond the edge of her safety. But Gideon did not touch her. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at her with an expression she didn't yet know how to read, and said, "You don't have to be afraid of me. I'm not going to hurt you." Willow said nothing. Years of living under Corin's roof had taught her that silence was safer than hope, that kindness from strangers was usually a trick with a delayed cost. So she followed him down the road, clutching her bag, waiting for the moment the mask would slip. It never did. They walked nearly 2 miles before reaching a modest shelter on the edge of town, where Gideon shared a small room with 2 other men who had fallen on hard times. He gave Willow the only blanket that didn't have holes in it. He gave her the last of his bread without being asked. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked from disuse and disbelief. "Why are you being nice to me? You don't even know me." Gideon looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that carried more history than words could hold, and said simply, "Because somebody was kind to me once. When I had nothing, I never forgot it." Over the following days, Willow began to see the man beneath the ragged coat. He was patient in a world that had given him every reason not to be. He spoke to people on the street not with pity but with respect, calling the shelter's cook by name, thanking the woman who handed out coffee at the corner as if she were royalty. He never complained about the cold nights or the empty stomachs. Slowly, cautiously, Willow's guarded heart began to loosen its grip, not because her circumstances had improved, but because for the first time in years, someone was treating her like she mattered. She told him her story in pieces the way people do when trust is still healing. How her father had died when she was 7. How Corinne had married him only for the house and the inheritance. How the moment her father was in the ground, Corinne's affection evaporated like morning mist. How Willow became an afterthought, then a burden, then finally, this morning, a transaction. Gideon listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening only once. When she described the day, Corinne locked her out in the rain for coming home 10 minutes late from school. "Nobody should have to earn the right to be loved," he told her quietly. "Not from anyone. Not ever." It was nearly 2 weeks later. On an ordinary sunlit afternoon when everything changed, Willow had gone with Gideon to a small diner where he sometimes did dishes in exchange for a hot meal, and a car unlike any she had ever seen pulled up outside. Sleek and black and gleaming under the noon sun, 3 men in tailored suits stepped out, and one of them, visibly nervous, approached Gideon and said, "Mr. Calloway, the board has been trying to reach you for 6 days. The Ashworth merger closes tomorrow. We need your signature." Willow stood frozen, her mind struggling to reconcile the ragged man beside her with the name that made the suited men straighten their posture like soldiers. Gideon exhaled, glanced at her with something like guilty tenderness, and finally said the words that would upend everything she thought she understood about her own life. "I own Calloway Industries. I have for the last 20 years, he explained gently, that every year he spent 1 month living without his fortune, without his name, without the walls money built around a person, because his own father had once told him that a man who forgets what it feels like to have nothing will eventually forget how to be human. This year, that month had led him to a driveway where a desperate woman was selling her stepdaughter for $200, and something in him refused to walk away. Willow's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She wasn't standing beside a homeless man. She had never been sold to someone with nothing. She had been sold, unknowingly, to one of the wealthiest men in the country, and he had chosen, in that moment, kindness over convenience. The weeks that followed unfolded like something out of a dream. Willow was almost afraid to trust. Gideon didn't simply offer her comfort and send her on her way. He enrolled her in the design program she had quietly dreamed of since childhood, the one Corinne had mocked as impractical. He introduced her not as a charity case, but as someone he respected, someone whose resilience humbled him. And when Corinne, hearing rumors of what had happened, arrived at his offices, demanding a share of what she called her rightful compensation, Gideon met her not with anger, but with quiet, devastating clarity. "You sold a child for $200, he said, loud enough for the lobby to hear. "You didn't lose a daughter. You never had one to lose. You had an obligation, and you traded it away the moment it stopped being convenient." Corinne, left with nothing but the humiliation she had built for herself, brick by cruel brick over 11 long years. If you're feeling something right now, if this story stirred your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still exists in this world. Months later, Willow stood in a sunlit studio that bore her name on the door, sketches of her first fashion line pinned across the walls, the sunflower apron framed gently in the corner as a reminder of where she came from rather than a wound she needed to hide. Gideon visited often, not as an owner checking on an investment, but as something closer to family, the kind she had been told she didn't deserve. She often thought back to that morning in the driveway, how close she had come to believing that her worth could be measured in crumpled bills, how a stranger's quiet decency had rewritten the entire trajectory of her life. Before we close this story, if it touched you even a little, type the word grace in the comments below, so we know this story reached the hearts it was meant to reach. Willow Hartman was never property. She was never a transaction, never a burden, never anyone's afterthought. She was a girl who had been failed by the one person who should have protected her, and saved by a stranger who had nothing to gain and everything to give. And in the end, the $200 that once represented her lowest moment became the beginning of a life so rich in purpose, so full of dignity, that no price tag could ever come close to measuring what she was truly worth.